Hello and welcome to Real Watchers Movie Club. My name is Garrett.
And I'm Kevin.
And we are your hosts. Movie Club is a show where we pick a movie every week and watch it and discuss it, just kind of like a book club. On today's show, we are covering the suspense horror thriller, The Silence of the Lambs. Our thoughts and more coming up on Movie Club. Released in 1991, The Silence of the Lambs was directed by Jonathan Demme and stars Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins, and Ted Levine. A young FBI cadet must receive the help of an incarcerated and manipulative cannibal killer to help catch another serial killer, a madman who skins his victims. The Silence of the Lambs won 5 Oscars for Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director, Best Actor for Anthony Hopkins, Best Actress for Jodie Foster, and Best Picture, and was nominated for Best Sound and Best Film Editing. It is currently number 23 on IMDb's Top 250 and has a 4.3 out of 5 on Letterboxd and is ranked number 91 on its Top 250. But before we dive into our thoughts, we do want to issue a spoiler warning for the film. If you haven't watched it yet, we are going to be discussing plot twists, parts of the story, revelations, and more on the show. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video here, you're not going to offend us. Go watch the movie and then come on back and we will discuss it here. As of the time of recording, it is available to stream on Max. Stay tuned to the end of the show to find out what movie we'll be covering next week. Again, before we dive into this video, we want to mention that this movie this week was recommended to us by our good friend Nadia over at the YouTube channel Horror and More, which I will go ahead and plug on screen right now. It's an awesome channel. Make sure to go give her some love. Alrighty, Kevin. So we got a pretty... I was going to say a stark difference in terms of movies because we had Django Unchained last week and now we're going into more of a horror suspense thriller with Silence of the Lambs, but both are pretty violent, all things considered in what happens in some of these movies, so it's not too stark of a change. But tell me about this. Was this your first time watching it? Had you seen the movie before? What's your history with it?
I have no history of it. I've always known about it. I've always known that it was a Hannibal Lecter movie, so this was a first time watch, and I'm very surprised on how much I actually liked the movie. I was going into it not thinking I would like it because, in my opinion and in Nadia's opinion, this isn't really a horror movie. So that's what was kind of throwing me off a little bit, but thoroughly enjoyed it throughout the entire time. So I'm glad that I was disappointed after the movie was done.
Glad that you were disappointed in that you liked it more than you thought you would?
Yeah, something like that.
I don't know. It makes sense in your head. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
As for me, I mean, obviously this is one of the biggest movies of all time, most talked about in film circles. I had seen it once, maybe back when I was in high school, and I liked it then, but never really watched it again until now. So this is probably the freshest kind of viewing that we've had on the show so far for me in one of these movies. And yeah, we'll go ahead, we'll talk about it, but this movie it's fantastic from beginning to end. Thoroughly enjoyed watching it this time around.
Yeah, it was very suspenseful. I don't know, it was just like a really good, like, I don't want to call it a detective movie, but that's what it feels like when you're watching it.
Yeah, it really feels like, obviously Silence of the Lambs is an inspiration for several films. You can really see some of the inspirations play in other films like Seven, even in films like The Batman, which came out last year in 2022. There's a lot of the similar ideas and styles that are carried through from film to film. But you nailed it on the head. This film is suspenseful from its opening to its ending. Like you're always on the edge of your seat. There's always like something to make you feel uneasy.
Yeah, and it was always like, how does Hannibal know this? Does he do this? Like, the thing was, for me, it's like, she's telling this cadet, first of all, she's a cadet. She's not even in the FBI yet, which was a little weird for me because I'm like, well, why do they just want a cadet? Well, she's fresh meat, pretty much. no pun intended, but bringing a lamb to the slaughter. That's what
Mhm.
this movie was like for me. Was here's an experience that you'll never forget. But yeah, he was just so sinister. Like he didn't have to have a grungy voice or like be a villain, like have a villain voice. He was the villain. He knew he was a villain. He just laid back in his chair and just said the calmest things about everything, which that is some villains who do that are just like they're worse. They're worse than some villains that are in other movies.
100%. And obviously, we're talking about Anthony Hopkins here. One of the best performances, I think, one of the best villain performances for sure of all time. And let's not gloss over that intro shot where you're walking down the corridor with Clarice, and then he just comes into frame, and he's just standing there.
Mhm.
And from moment one, you know you're not messing with this guy. Like, he is more intelligent than you. He is stronger than you, even though he doesn't look like it. This is a man that will overpower and kill you, like, if given the slightest chance.
Yeah, he fills the room a lot, every time he is on screen. He is in a jail cell, but he fills that whole camera reel when he's on screen. And when he's just talking to Clarice, he's in the background, but the camera's focused on Clarice. He's the star of the show, and he knows it too. He's very intelligent, but he's like serial killer intelligent, but he's also polite, unlike any of the other people that are down in the hole with him. So it makes him even more sinister. It's like, well, should he even be down here? Well, yes, he killed a bunch of people, but it's like he knows he did it, and he's fine with it. And that's I mean, and like you're saying, the performance of this guy is unmatched.
It's literally, he's normal until he's not. There's just that one thing that he says, or the one thing that he does. You know, obviously on first meeting, you get the classic line, you know,
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Like, that's after just talking with Clarice, like, for just like a normal human being would. It's absolutely fascinating. It's wonderfully done by Anthony Hopkins, and I gotta remember, I did not remember the entire sequence of him breaking out, but I legitimately did not remember or did not know what was going on until like just a hair of a second before they reveal what happened. And I was just like, oh no.
Yeah. And it's like, but then you have to figure out he got out because of how sinister he is and how intelligent he is. He's not down there because he's mentally insane. He's mentally intelligent, which I would classify him as. Like, he's one of the most dangerous ones down there.
I mean, he's insane, but he's not, you know, he's not intelligent. He is a very smart man, but
yeah,
he's not in his right mind.
Oh yeah, But like like you said, when he said something, your brain would be like, oh, here's the serial killer part of him. Like when Clarice is trying to get information, he goes, so tell me about your childhood. It's like, why do you need to know that? Like, that's what made it like creepy, because it's like, you don't really need. She's like, I don't really need to tell you that. And he goes, well, you kind of do, because the serial killer's out there, and I'm not going to give you anything unless you give me something, pretty much.
So there's another reason behind that, though. So when that happens, if you pay attention, whenever he's asking her about her life and where she's been, he looks away. He doesn't look at her. And it's all a test. He is trying to deduce whether she is lying or not. And he can tell. He says that he can tell. You know,
that's true.
It is a little bit of like almost like a sick perversion of the Dr. King Schultz and Django relationship that we covered last week, right? They're building that rapport. They're building a relationship, whether or not Clarice wants to. You know, they are still building that foundational relationship. You're telling me the truth. I know if you're lying, which does play in a little bit later when Clarice does offer him the deal from the senator, and we find out that, you know, she's not in like knowingly lying. She didn't know that it was false. It turns out it was her boss that gave her the false information. You know, he believes her. Like, and it's because, you know, they played right into it. It's just fantastic. But I do want to pivot because we've been talking about Anthony Hopkins this whole time. We need to talk Jodie Foster, because I don't think, at least in the discussions that I see, I don't see her getting mentioned nearly as much as she should. She is fantastic in this movie.
Yeah, she is. I mean, she plays the cadet very well. Like, she goes into the thing acting strong, and then she just gets put down immediately. And then she's like, "Oh, I'm not in the right place right now," and she has to talk her way out of some situations. And even her talking about her childhood and stuff, and she kind of breaks down sometimes during talking with Lecter about it, and you get to see why she wants to become in the FBI and stuff like that, and what it was like back when she was younger too.
Yeah, and I'm really gonna have to rewatch, because she does obviously come off as a strong, intelligent character. Like, she knows what she's doing. She knows, you know, how to work everything through. But then, you know, every time she's in a situation where she's around police officers, or I don't know if you noticed this when you were watching, but whenever, like, there's a beginning part where she's running, doing her exercise, and every guy that she passes by either checks her out or just looks at her. And there's the sequence with the funeral home where she walks into the room with all the cops, and all the cops just stare at her. And the way that the cinematography is done, it makes her look smaller than everyone else in the room. It's a really interesting choice.
Well, is this because a lot of women weren't in like the FBI and the police department and stuff like that? So them seeing a woman in uniform and stuff like that going on a big case like this, they're like, "What are you doing here? Like, this is a man's job pretty much." But then she shows herself and everybody else that she can get this done no matter what gender she is and stuff like that. But even when they're in the morgue and the policemen are around her and she's trying to thank them, and they just don't even care, just walk out the door.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also used to serve the purpose, right, that she builds, again, like whether she wants to or not, this rapport built relationship with Lecter. Like, Lecter's the only one, arguably, except for her mentor, the FBI agent played by Scott Glenn. He's the only one that treats her with respect, and like actually is like, "No, you're good at this. No, like, look in the details. Don't do the easy answer. Like, what's actually there?" Like, he's pushing her to be better, which is just such a fascinating relationship. And it all comes into point at the end too, you know, when he's on the phone with her, right? And she knows, like, even before then, after Lecter escapes, she's talking with her friend, and like, she's like, "Yeah, no, he's not coming after me. Like, he wouldn't. There's no reason to." And at the end, he just goes, "No, the world's better with you in it." And it's just such a weird, cathartic, like, positive moment from such a negative character. It's just absolutely fascinating.
It's kind of weird saying this, but Hannibal Lecter was her dad the second half of her life, pretty much, because her dad's life got cut short when he died, when she was little.
There's definitely an argument to be shed there, yeah.
And then he picks up, he's like, no, you got this. Don't worry. It's like encouraging words that a father would use if he was still alive.
Yeah, 100%. It's a really fascinating, and that's what leads me kind of into the next thing I wanted to talk about. Kevin's the master of initiating segues. The story of this is fantastic. The relationship between Clarice and Lecter is obviously front and center, but there is just never-ending tension with all the reveals having to do with Buffalo Bill. Really, that relationship, the pseudo-platonic relationship between Clarice and Lecter, front and center, is probably the most fascinating part of the movie from a story point of view.
Yeah, it was suspenseful all the times when they were in the cells. Every time he talked, every time she talked about something, and then even suspenseful when what's his cellmate? It's like Mead or something like that.
Miggs or something like that.
Miggs, yeah, Miggs. Miggs dies, and the cops are like, "Oh yeah, it was Hannibal." Like that's it, because Miggs disrespected Clarice, and Hannibal was not having it. He was like, "Nah, you don't disrespect this woman that I'm talking to," which is, it's so cool because it's like he literally stood up for her when no one else would.
Yeah. Again, it's like it's a really fascinating relationship between the two of them. The amount of respect that he has for her, and I guess you could say respect that she has for him, right? She brought him his artwork when he was being held in the hotel. And just, yeah, she brought him the fake deal, even though she didn't know it was fake. She brought it to him, was the one to let him know. And yeah, again, just absolutely fascinating. And I do want to touch back on the Buffalo Bill, obviously that storyline. One of my only things I kind of, maybe I didn't catch it this time around, is the link between Lecter and Buffalo Bill. I guess from what I remember of the film, the link that they had is that Buffalo Bill killed one of Lecter's patients.
I guess I don't really remember connecting the two. So
yeah, honestly, that wasn't a little clear enough, which is unfortunate because obviously there's a psychological profile as well that he's able to do on him, but it was kind of weird whatever the link was between the head that she found in the storage unit, which is one of Lecter's patients, which isn't clear whether Lecter killed him or Buffalo Bill did. So it's just that part's a little bit confusing. It's not too terrible of an omission, I guess. Honestly, I may have to rewatch the movie again to specifically watch out for that. But kind of an interesting connection that I don't feel like, at least on the viewing, didn't feel fully explored.
Yeah, and then the Buffalo Bill character was played really well as well. He is a sinister serial killer who will just do whatever it takes. Like when he got, was it Peggy in the back of the van? Well, it was the senator's daughter.
The senator's daughter.
Much.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there in the movie theater. You're watching it, and he's struggling to put the couch in the back of the van, and you're like, bro, you're not supposed to go over there. You're not supposed to go over there and help him. And then it happens. You're like, oh shit. And for the longest time, because I haven't watched this movie before, I thought put the lotion in the basket, that was Hannibal Lecter that always used to say that in my mind. I didn't know there was another serial killer in this movie.
Yeah, it's not. That's not his line. And it's really fascinating too, because I had just watched another movie recently about a serial killer, and they also brought up. I mean, the character in that film brought up the point that if you want to bring someone closer, you want to get someone within range that you can overpower them and get to them, you fake a disability. You have a crutch, you have a cast, you ask for help with something, because then the better nature of that person will take over and you can get over. It's just finished interesting that two movies in the same week that I watched had that same thread in it. It was just a fascinating notion. But yeah, it's easy to see why someone could just want to go, oh yeah, he's got a broken arm, let me help him with that couch. Although as soon as you're as soon as they are like, yeah, go all the way inside the van, I feel no, you can do that. It's your car. I also love how it does show. the senator's daughter, though, has that moment of hesitation where she's about to go back walking towards the door house, but then turns around.
Well, it's like when you're watching, you're like, oh, she's gonna make the right fucking decision. No, she's not. And then right back into the van. But the way the serial killer, chooses his victims because they're a little chubbier, so when the skin dehydrates, he can sew it up, that was interesting to me, because I'm like, wait, that makes total sense, because if he wants to make a bodysuit, he can't make them skinny girls because it'll just tear. And I'm like, wow, that's actually genius.
It's sickeningly genius. Yeah. But it's not the fact that the skin dehydrates, it's that he starves them so that the skin gets loose on the body, because they lose that weight and they kind of get, malnourished. Also, I do want to bring up the fact that I feel like it's been a long time since I've seen a movie about a serial killer where he treats the kidnappee or the victim with like no regard, no respect, barely talks to her, treats her like trash, essentially, like an animal,
Yeah, he doesn't care what your name is or who you are, because if he would have known that was the senator's daughter, he probably wouldn't have gone after her, pretty much, because of how high of a threat that is to like the county or state. And he was just like, no, you're coming with me. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your name is. You're gonna get put into this hole, and here's some food, which wasn't even food, pretty much. So
yeah, I think she mentioned it was like scraps at some point, like unfit for an animal. It's just absolutely nuts. But one of the other things that was kind of crazy is that there's always like moth imagery that's used with this movie, and I never understood why, even when I was in high school, because I guess it'd been so long since I had seen it last, that I completely forgot the whole plot line where he's obsessed with the butterflies and imports them from Asia.
Yeah, it was cool to see that, because it's like he wants to come out of his shell pretty much, but he can't, and that's why he's making the suit, so he can feel like a butterfly, but he keeps putting moths in people's mouths, which is the total opposite of a butterfly, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, either way, they're coming out of that cocoon, right? They're coming out of that shell, and it's just like, in his eyes, a beautiful creature. So
exactly.
Kind of what he is intending to be.
And then also the lamb talk, when Hannibal has the lamb talk with Clarice, so good. Was that done in one take? Do we know? Because if that was done in like one take or something, that was a great one take. Because just him explaining like, oh, it's basically voices or memories. Are they stopped yet? Do you hear the lambs still, Clarice, and stuff like that? I'm like, oh my gosh, he's so he's so sinister, but he's talking about normal things.
It's really nuts. I actually was trying to look and see if that was a one take. It's not a one take. So one thing I do want to talk about is something I actually went through recently, and I've been having a bad habit of watching old Siskel and Ebert reviews of older movies that they did back in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And I watched the one for Silence of the Lambs, which is funny because neither of them thought that it was an incredible film, which just goes to show that even the best film critics are wrong from time to time. But they had a problem with the ending, and I want to see what you think. So they said that the ending is where the movie falls apart. I don't think it falls apart, but falls apart because it turns into a generic monster in the house scenario.
Are they talking about like when they going into Buffalo Bill's house and stuff like that? Like that ending?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are a SWAT team. They have to go in there to save.
Like the part where he's chasing Clarice through the house.
I mean, I don't know. Like it had to be included because Clarice knows where this serial killer is because of Hannibal. and she goes there herself. She has to be the one to catch him, and her running through the house just makes it more of a horror movie, pretty much, which they had the suspense, they had the character development, and they just added in a little bit of horror as well. But no, that was definitely needed in there because he's a serial killer. Like, he's going to chase you around the house until he can catch you, or he will die trying, pretty much. So I think that had to be included.
Yeah, and I do think they missed the point because, I mean, yeah, sure, the killer chasing the victim through the house, sure, it's tried and true, but that glosses over the fact that the revelation that the SWAT went to the wrong house is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is such a, like, you don't expect that to happen at all.
Yeah, it's like when they're searching through the house, it looks exactly like his house too. So it makes you think who's in the correct house, and then she rings the doorbell, and he shows up to the front of the house, and it's like, oh crap, she's there alone, and that's what makes it more suspenseful, because it's like, okay, she's alone, she doesn't have backup, she's there by herself. And that's what makes it I mean, that's a good ending right there, when they realize,
also,
crap,
the callback for when she's doing the training for entering into the room and she forgets her blind spot, and the blind spot's where Buffalo Bills is, and she takes care of it. Just saying, it works.
Yep,
it really works.
And would you consider this might be, I don't know, maybe a hot take, would you consider this a horror movie?
Yes and no. I think because suspense films get lumped in with horror more often than they deserve to be. I think that I think the film has horror aspects for sure, especially the last act, everything having to do with Buffalo Bill's house. Having such and obviously it's got a serial killer, it deals with serial killers. Anything that has serial killers in it feels like it intrinsically has a link to horror because of things like Leatherface and Michael Myers and things like that. But on the whole, I wouldn't say it's a horror film. I would say most likely it is a thriller, a suspense thriller, which the IMDb genre is listed as a crime drama thriller. Yeah, I think it's just got elements of horror. I think when most people refer to it as a horror film, it's because it's the first film with any kind of horror aspects to win Best Picture, and I think that is where a lot of that misconception comes from.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, I can see the horror as in like them going to the morgue and seeing the skin being pulled off and stuff like that. That could be a horror aspect. But this movie feels like what IMDb said. It's a crime, drama, thriller, and suspense movie. I would put it under. I'm not saying that if some people think this is horror, that's their opinion. But on my opinion, it's a suspense thriller movie. Which when I see it like that, this is a fantastic movie for that genre.
Yeah, and I think, obviously, the like comedy, horror is very subjective, right? People find different things scary, and someone may find this film to be very scary and will consider it a horror film because it scared them. And I think that enough people think that it may have influenced the zeitgeist around the film into thinking that it is a horror film when it's really just a thriller, kind of through and through. But I would say though that if let's say your primary genre is horror, like that's what you watch, that's like your favorite genre, I feel like this is a really nice bridging point between a drama and a horror movie, which is obviously what a suspense or thriller movie is. I think if you want to start getting out into other movies that aren't necessarily scary but have horror elements, this is a great way to start that.
And it's kind of an older movie, so it's not too intense. It's not too jump scary. Some thriller suspense movies have jump scares in them. This is just, here's what you're given. This is what you're going to see. If you like it, you like it. Pretty much. And that's what I like about it, is it's a really good, like you said, an intro into horror, or like a horror fan going into like a suspense movie. It can go either way.
Yeah, horror adjacent is probably the best way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, so we have talked enough good stuff about this movie for long enough, but Kevin, this was your first time watching it. What are your final thoughts? And do you have like a score on your Letterboxd? Like, what do you want to go over with that?
So I have a score on my Letterboxd, which I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. But this was a fantastic movie. I was pleasantly surprised that I was basically on the edge of my seat. And no pun intended, because I actually was at the listening to him. But little bit of final thoughts is I want this on DVD. I want this on Blu-ray. I want this on 4K. When it comes out as a cool cover, I want it because that's how much I enjoyed it. And I would like to watch it again, maybe watch it with kids, friends, stuff like that, just to show them how that back in the day, what this was
1991.
91, like this is a good suspense movie that doesn't go into a lot of horror, and it's a great movie. Just that's it.
Yeah. I'm in a similar boat too. I also, well, the way my scoring works is it also got a 4.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd for me, but I gave it a 98 out of 100. I said that The Silence of the Lambs is an engaging and thrilling piece from start to finish. The Silence of the Lambs is an S-tier film that over 30 years later. Jodie Foster plays a wonderful lead, and Hopkins gives one of the most iconic film performances of all time. What's truly incredible is its tension never lets up and feels expertly crafted on all levels to deliver a memorable experience. And I feel like that sums up pretty well what we've talked about today.
Oh, yeah.
Another thank you to our friend Nadia from the YouTube channel Horror and More. This was an awesome suggestion. Thank you so much for it. If you have any suggestions, make sure to put them down in the comments below. So the question now falls to you. What did you think of The Silence of the Lambs? We'd love to hear from you in the comment section down below to hear your honest takes on the movie, but remember to be respectful of one another. Next week, we'll be covering the legendary comedy Groundhog Day. So make sure to watch the film before next week to make sure that you aren't spoiled. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. We've got our weekly live streams every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, as well as intermittent content that releases throughout whenever we feel like releasing them. But also follow us on social media, Real Watchers everywhere, including our TikTok, which will be receiving some new content very soon. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you again so much for watching, and until next time, keep your eyes on the screen.